this is going to seem like a kind of a sideways text for Palm Sunday, but it's not. And I hope that as we go through it today, you'll see that it's not. The people who came into Jerusalem on that day came because, as good Jews and proselytes, they were coming for this week-long festival that they came for every year. It was part of your kind of required participation as a Jew. And they came with expectations. Their expectations were the festival, the food. It's kind of like, and I don't want to make fun of anything, but I'm trying to relate to it myself. It's kind of like when you have a town festival. We used to have a lot of those in the Northeast. They don't do it much here. But it'd be like the James family reunion kind of festival, although this would be citywide. And so there were lots of reasons people came to this that really weren't necessarily directly tied with the Judaism and the observance of it, but it was linked there. So it was a party atmosphere. The Passover festival in Jerusalem was a party. And people came with different expectations. What are we going there for? What do we expect it to be like last year when we were here? Or I've never been to one. I'm a new Jewish proselyte and I want to go and participate in this thing, so I have expectations in that way. Those are all planted in people's minds. I think about it every time I look out and see anybody in front of me. I think, what are our expectations when we show up here? What are we really expecting? I can only speak for Rip. Well, I won't speak for Rip. What do we expect? We have expectations, do we not? Right. So here they are. They come to this Passover like every other Passover. The Jews that have been coming to it for generations, some of them aged, had been to 30 Passovers. And this one's going to be different. And they don't really understand why. Jesus comes down from the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem. He's been coming to Jerusalem for several days. Part of that is where you see him in Luke, where he looks out over the city and he says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered you as a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not come." Who is that that's speaking? Who is that? How often I would have gathered you? For millennia I would have gathered you, but you would not come. That's Yahweh, God Almighty in the flesh, speaking over this city. But he comes into this city with different expectations. He knows things that are going to happen that nobody there knows. Nobody. He knows that these shouts that he's going to hear as they throw their palm branches and cloaks in front of the donkey that he rides in on of Hosanna are just not even a week later going to be crucified. He knows that. He knows that there will be people who will be farmed into these trials that he's going to have, and they will be commissioned to lie so that he is convicted of insurrection and treason sufficient, and blasphemy under Jewish law sufficient that the Romans can have him and crucify him. He knows that. He knows his friends are going to scatter. He's already said that to them. He said, you will all leave me. He knows that. He knows Peter's going to outright deny him during the trials. I don't even know who that is. He knows that Judas is going to turn him in. He loved Judas. We don't have a perspective of what that must have been like for Jesus, who loved Judas, to see Judas turn him in. We don't know what that felt like. He knows also that in about 34 years, there's going to be an event on the temple steps that are going to really upset the Jews, so much so that they become so clamorous that the Romans step in 66 AD, and they destroy the temple and they crucify tens of thousands of people on a dirt berm that goes around the city. He knows that's going to happen too. He prophesied it. There'll be a day when not one stone of this temple you see here rests upon another. He knows all of that, and then he knows about us. He knows that there will be people who will use his name as Jesus, the Son of God, that they'll wear crosses, they'll carry Bibles. And yet, with their lives, they'll implicitly deny that they know him. He knows all of that, but he comes anyway. He comes anyway. Let's look at this text. Genesis chapter 22. I'll begin reading in verse 1. Sometime later, God tested Abraham, and he said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," Abraham replied. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountains where I will tell you to go." Early the next morning, Abraham got up, saddled his donkey, took with him 2 of his servants and his own son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place that God had told him about. And on the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance and said to his servants, "You stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship God, and then we'll come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, carried the fire and the knife, and the 2 of them went together. And Isaac spoke up and said to his father, "Abraham, father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here." Isaac said, "Where's the lamb for the sacrifice, for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place that God had told him about, Abraham built an altar and there arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And when he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son, an angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he said. That's kind of his stock reply. I don't know why that is. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. I know now that you fear God because you've not withheld your own son from me." Abraham looked up there and he saw a thicket and a ram caught by its horns. And he went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." To this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and you've not withheld your only son, I will bless you. And I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all the nations of the earth will be blessed because you've obeyed me." Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed there in Beersheba. Now, what's the purpose for this test? I remember when I was in Sunday school, everybody who's been in church, they had the little primers. We called them primers. I remember being in the primaries at First Baptist Church, Waycross, and my grandmother teaching the 6-year-olds and getting the little book. And there was the picture of Abraham with the knife up like this and Isaac strapped to it. And I remember all that. And I remember there was a lesson taught from it. And the lesson was, don't hold back from God. Give everything to God. I remember that lesson. But God selected, think about this from Abraham's perspective. Abraham was wandering around in Mesopotamia just like all the other Semites, and God plucked him out. Why? God only knows. But he plucked Abraham out, and through now Abraham's life is going to be vastly different than he ever could have imagined it to be had this not occurred. And this is one of those differences. I'm going to say Abraham didn't welcome this one. I would. And the whole process hinges in a response, does it not? Do you think, as you're sitting here, and you don't have to answer this, just think about it. Do you think that Abraham could have chosen otherwise? I do. I mean, if we call it obedience, why would we call it that? Because it's a choice. If it's just raw obedience and there's no choice about it, you don't call it obedience anymore. You just call it what is. Right? If you take a rock and you drop it, it obeys gravity. It's not because the rock chooses that. It's just doing what it does. And if we could not choose in this instance, then obedience would just be what we do. Now think about it in terms of Jesus. Jesus came into Jerusalem. He was directing his path into Jerusalem for a number of days. Could he have chosen otherwise? That's a big question, is it not? The Bible says that Jesus set his face like flint toward Jerusalem. That sounds like somebody choosing to me. So, Abraham believed God. God reckoned it to him as righteousness. Abraham prayed for Sodom. He did lots of things throughout his history of life. And then he comes to this moment. And you see there in verse 2, where it says, God said, take your son. And he gives him this long list where I don't want to say it's hard, but it is hard. He keeps ramping up the intensity of this choice that Abraham is going to make. Your son, your only son, the one you love. Take him. Oh, I just can't believe. And I bet you Abraham looks back to that moment where he believed God and God reckoned it to him as righteousness, and he thinks, I wonder what that choice means now. Because look at what it's going to mean. So we know the story. Don't hold back from God. We understand that lesson. I'm going to say, for me, as a reader of the Bible, I can't speak for anybody else in this room, I do not capture this emotion here. I do not. I cannot make my mind go to the place where I would take Jackson at God's behest and do something like this. I can't make that happen in my brain. I just can't feel it. I can't feel Palm Sunday either. I can't feel Jesus' choice. I can't feel the festive atmosphere of the people. I can't feel any of those things. I'm too far away from it. I'm too far away. The whole sacrificial system, was a misunderstood one. The Jewish sacrificial system, the Jews thought it was for God. They thought they were doing this for God. They forgot what their prophets had said, where God speaks and says, your sacrifices have become a stench in my nostrils. I don't want sacrifice, he said through Samuel. I want obedience. In other words, I want you people to choose to obey me, not because I'm forcing it. Now I want to stop for a minute and try, as best as I can as a Gentile modern Westerner, to feel this moment. I want us to just enter into it for just a minute mentally. We have that incredible capacity with no motion, that there's something that's immaterial that happens inside our heads wherein we can actually live something out that we've never done. I want us to think about what it was like for Abraham and Isaac. Abraham knows. Jesus knew. Abraham knows what's coming. Isaac's just a kid. He's obviously old enough to ask right questions, right? He says, hey, Dad, I see the wood and I see the knife. Where's the thing we're going to kill? He's been to enough of these sacrifices to understand the process. He's seen it. Where's that? They walk for days. This isn't like they look across this field and they're going to walk across this. Days Abraham has to think about this while he's walking. Isaac's carrying the wood. Abraham is conscious of all that's coming. I think about this in terms of a child's trust. Isaac trusts his dad. He's not worried a bit. And they're walking along. Abraham knows, Isaac does not. I don't know if you're aware of this or not. What do you think it means when a child misbehaves? I'm sorry?
What it means?
Yeah, it means something. You know what it means? It does mean something. What does it mean?
They're human.
I'm sorry?
Does it mean they want attention?
Possibly. But that means something too. It means something when they misbehave. You know what it means?
They have their choice.
They trust mom and dad. I can do these things and mom and dad will love me. They might punish me, but they'll love me. That's what it means. That's why children are different at home than they are with other families. I used to get these reports, people come to me, oh, you and Becky have done such a good job. He is so polite. He is so nice. I'm thinking, who are we speaking about here? Who is this is this somebody else's? No, Jackson, he's just so, and I'm thinking, I appreciate that. I wish that I saw it. It would be so much nicer. And that's not to say it's always bad, but the reason he misbehaved was because he knows that Becky and I are never going to toss him aside. We love him. That's why we misbehave. There's a clue to your relationship with God and mine in that picture. There is a clue there. The Jews misbehaved in front of God the whole history. Look at the history up and down. God never stopped loving them. They were never not his people. So they've got these moments, they're walking along, Isaac doesn't know what's going on. What got sacrificed, what was sacrificed, the sacrificial system was, I look at Isaac and he's thinking, where's the lamb? He had seen this before. It is I don't know how to say it. I'm, again, a Gentile, Westerner, modern. The thought, 250,000 lambs would be sacrificed during Passover week. There was a valley beneath the Temple Mount wherein they said it would run red because they would let the blood drain. I can't touch that in my Western brain. I can't put myself there. It seems horrible to me. It's supposed to seem that way. The sacrificial system was horrible. People became comfortable with it. Isaac was comfortable with it. He'd seen it from childhood up. You talk about somebody who's raised on a farm and seeing animals slaughtered. I don't get to see that. It hurts me to watch it. For some, it's not so big a deal. But what had happened to the sacrificial system was it had lost that edge where it says this is what sin looks like before God. They've forgotten that. They figured the sacrifices were for God's sake. They were not. They were always for the people's sake. Always. So this triumphal entry here, what does it mean? What does it really mean? What's the message for the people who are gathered there? They've got this Mardi Gras atmosphere. They don't have a connection with what this really means. Jesus knows what it means, but they don't. They're just doing what they do every Passover when they come to town. What's the message? It's a multiple leveled message. One of the messages is, here's the king who's already the king coming. And he's asking for the throne. He came in on a donkey. He didn't come in on a horse. The throne's mine. I'm coming in to conquer everybody. Get out of my way. He came in on a donkey and says, will you give me the throne? That was the message. The whole of the Old Testament. You know what strikes me? G.K. Chesterton said this. I wish I'd made it up. It sounds really good. I like it. It makes sense to my head. G.K. Chesterton said that the whole of the Old Testament, as far as he could see, with all that goes on in it, has one message. It's the lonely parent searching for his wayward children all the way through. That makes sense to me. Well, here's the parent coming into town, knowing everything that's going to happen. He has given his children, you and me and the Jews, full freedom to be wayward our whole life. Why? He loves us. We don't see it the way he sees it. We see it as, and you talk to somebody who doesn't believe today, how do they see God? God is this celestial, as Christopher Hitchens used to say, the celestial dictator who's up there ruling over everybody, and we're just all the cowering servants. Is that the picture? No, it's not. This is a parent who knows that he has given us enough leash to hurt ourselves. And when we hurt ourselves sufficiently, he intervened. He intervened. He's intervening when he comes down that hill into Jerusalem. The lonely parent searching for his children is intervening once again, but he's going to do it in a way that nobody expects. I remember when I was a kid, if you're not a boy, excuse me, I got something in my eye. If you're not a boy, you can't relate to this. Maybe you can, I don't know. Maybe I'm being sexist and stereotypical, I don't know. But I remember we used to play Army. That was so fun. And of course, it's not fun to take a plastic machine gun and point it and go like that. That's okay for a while, and somebody's supposed, the rules are you're supposed to fall down when you're spotted and you're shot at, so you fall down. But that didn't satisfy us, so you have to ramp it up a bit. You have dirt bomb fights, where you take dirt clods that have, pow, and you're hitting the head, you can see it, it hurts. The dust cloud, everybody gets really excited about that as boys. That was fun. Well, we were having one of those, and my cousins and I had built this fort. And of course, if you saw it today, you'd say, this looks like one of those dwellings in one of these countries we're trying to help. I mean, it really was just a bunch of pieces of wood stacked together and thatch and everything else. And it had a window. And there was a kid who was the bad guy who was throwing things at us inside the fort. And so I'm inside, I'm the good guy. So I stick my face out the window of the fort, and the last image I remember is that of the sun shining on one side of a brick. And the brick hit me square in the face, right in the lip, split my lip so wide open you could see my teeth through my lip. And I remember going to the hospital. And at that time in history, anesthesia was somebody on each limb. Hold this arm down, this leg, I'll hold his head. And the doctor says, let me get the needle and the thread and the alcohol, and let's have at it. And they stitched me up, and I remember that. It hurt. It really hurt. You know, it's pretty sensitive right here. My parents, my dad was holding my head. My mom was holding my legs. Do you think for 1 minute that they didn't feel that pain watching their child be stitched up? Saw anesthesia? They did. They knew that in order for me to be healed, I had to be hurt. God is just like that. He is going to allow us to hurt ourselves to a point, and then He's going to intervene. He did it throughout the history of the Jews, and then He sent the Philistines, and then He sent the Assyrians, and then He sent the Persians, and then He sent the Babylonians, not in that order. Every time, and it hurt. They saw their houses burned, they saw their families deported, they saw themselves killed, their family members killed. Why? Because He couldn't allow us to hurt ourselves any longer. Jesus came into Jerusalem knowing everything He knew was coming. And He came into it because He knew that time had reached a place in which the fullness of time, we were hurting ourselves to a point that somebody had to intervene, and only God could. Only God could. And He came into that city asking only one thing. I'm king, but I'm asking for the throne. And I'm not asking for the throne of David, and I'm not kicking the Romans out of here. So, sorry. I'm asking for the throne of everybody's heart.